Hey guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a text effect like the one you see on the Guardians of the Galaxy movie posters. Let's get started. So I'm going to create a new document and I'm going to make that 1920 by 1280. And then I'm going to fill the background with a color 0E0C22. Next I'll create a new layer and fill it with black. Next I'm going to right click that layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. Then I'm going to click Filter, Noise, Add Noise. I'll set the amount to 100%, the distribution to Gaussian, and I want to have monochromatic checked. Next I'll click Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and give it a blur of 0.5 pixels. Next I'm going to come over and add a Levels Adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring the black stop up to about 185. I'm also going to click this icon to clip it to the layer beneath, so my levels adjustment layer only affects the layer right underneath it. Next I'll choose my noise layer and change the blend mode to screen. Now we have a nice looking starry sky to use as our background. Next I'm going to create another new layer and fill it with black. Then I'm going to click Filter, Render, Clouds. And I'm going to set the blend mode for my clouds layer to linear dodge, and the fill to just 7%. So now we have a little variation in the color in the sky. Next I'm going to come down and create a gradient fill layer. And for my gradient, I'm going to use this rainbow gradient that starts and ends with red. And it's one of the Photoshop defaults. So if you need to, you can click this gear icon and choose Reset Gradients to get that in your gradient presets. Then I'm going to make sure the style is set to angle and hit OK. Next I'll come change the blend mode for that to soft light and the fill to just 10%. And that'll give us some color variation on our background. Next we'll need to prepare a metal texture to use as a layer style for our text effect. So here's the texture that we're going to be working with, and the first thing that I want to do is take all the color out of it. So I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer, and then I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer. For my levels, I'm going to bring the black stop up to about 50 and the white stop down to about 210. Then I'll press Ctrl-Alt-Shift-E, and that'll make a merged copy of all of my layers. Now we want this texture to be seamless, so I'm going to click Filter, Other, Offset, and our texture is 800 by 600 pixels. So I want to set the horizontal and the vertical pixels to half the size of the canvas. So since it's 800 wide, I'm going to set that to 400, and since it's 600 vertically, I'm going to set that to 300, and make sure you have wraparound selected and hit OK. Next I'm going to come over to my spot healing brush tool and resize that a bit, and then I'm just going to click and drag over the seams in my image, and Photoshop will automatically get rid of them. It doesn't have to be perfect, we just want to get rid of any hard seams in the image. So now that our texture is ready, I'm going to come up and choose Edit, Define Pattern, and you can give it a name if you want, and hit OK. Next we'll need to create our text. There's no Guardians of the Galaxy replica font available yet, so we're going to be using ITC Machine. ITC Machine is not free, but there's a lot of free alternatives out there, and this effect looks good with a lot of different fonts. So first I'm going to create my text that says Guardians. And I'll need to change my text color to DAB 277. So I'm just going to resize that and move it around in my document a bit. And now we'll create the rest of our text. So I'm going to fast forward this part a bit, since it's easy but just takes a little bit of time. So now that we have our text in place, we need to apply some layer styles. So I'm going to double click my Guardians layer here, and the first thing that I'm going to do is give it a bevel and emboss. I want to set the technique from smooth to chisel hard, the depth to 125%, and then I want to set the angle to 170 degrees and 57 degrees. Then I'm going to open up my gloss contour and create a custom contour. So I'm going to drag this right point down just a bit, and then create a new point in the middle and drag that up. It doesn't have to be exact, but something like this will work. I'm going to change the highlight mode to linear dodge and the shadow mode to linear burn. And then I'm going to set the highlight opacity to 35% and the shadow opacity to 85%. Next, I'll turn on the Bevel and Emboss contour and leave the default settings. And I'm also going to turn on the Bevel and Emboss texture. Now, in the pattern picker, this is where we'll pick the pattern that we created a little while ago. Then I'll adjust the depth to -10% just to give it a little 3D effect. Next, I'll give it an inner shadow, and I want to set the color for that to white and the blend mode to color dodge. I'm going to uncheck Use Global Light and set the angle for that to 95 degrees and the opacity to 15%. Then I'll change the distance and the size to 2 pixels each. Next, I'll add an inner glow, and using the color black with the blend mode set to color burn, I'll set the opacity to 15%, the size to 10 pixels, and the range to 65%. Next, I'll add a gradient overlay to give it some highlights. So first I'm going to change my gradient, and I want it to have 5 stops. So I'll move this white stop to 25%, and then I'll click to create another white stop and set that to 75%. Then I'll click my black stop once, and then click again to create a new black stop and set that to 50%, and then finally click again to create a new black stop all the way at the end at 100% and hit OK. I'm going to set the blend mode to linear burn, the opacity to 17%, the angle to 85%, and the scale to 125%. Next, I'll add a pattern overlay using the same pattern we used in the Bevel and Emboss texture area. So I'll set the blend mode for that to overlay and the opacity to 65%. Lastly, I'm going to add an inner glow to act as a drop shadow. So I want the blend mode set to multiply, the opacity set to 25%, and the size set to 65 pixels. And that's it for our layer style, so I'm going to hit OK. Next, I want to apply the same layer styles to my other pieces of text. So I'm going to right-click my Guardians layer in the Layers panel and choose Copy Layer Style. And then I'll choose both of my other text layers, right-click them, and choose Paste Layer Style. Now, I need to resize the effects a bit on each of these other 2 text layers. So I'm going to double-click the Of The layer to open the Layer Styles dialog. And under Bevel and Emboss, I'm going to reduce the size from 5 pixels to just 2 pixels. Then I'll do the same for the Galaxy layer, except this time I'm going to reduce it from 5 pixels to 4 pixels. So I'm going to hold Alt and click this arrow to shrink all the layer styles in my Layers panel, and then I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click the 3 T icons for each of my text layers to make a selection around my text. Next, I'll create a new layer and select my brush tool, and I'm going to shrink my brush tool down to about 50 pixels. And using the color white, I'm just going to paint some streaks on my text that are going to act like highlights. So once you finish painting your highlights, you're going to press Ctrl D to deselect everything. And then I'm going to change the blend mode for my highlights to linear dodge and set the fill to 15%. Lastly, I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer and bring the center of that curve down and to the right to darken my entire image. And then within the layer mask for that curves adjustment layer, I'm going to paint using a large soft brush and the color black. That way, my curves adjustment layer only affects the corners and the outer edges of my image. If you want, you could also add some tagline text to your text effect. Now that you have this set up, you can always change the font that you're using, and then the only step you have to repeat is creating the highlights on your text. I'm John Shaver for Design Panoply. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.